Searing your food in your oven after sous vide gets a really bad rap. A lot of people tell you never to do that, but there are a few times that it is the right tool to pull out. I'm going to tell you what those are coming up next on Amazing Food Made Easy. Hey there, I'm Jason Longston from Amazing Food Made Easy and president of the International Sous Vide Association. And today I want to talk to you about searing your food after you sous vide it using your oven. Now, a lot of people tell you not to use your oven to sear your food, and I understand why. Air doesn't transfer heat as well, ovens don't get as hot as pans or grills most of the time, and so it's a lot easier to overcook your food after the sous vide process using your oven. So it can make it really hard and you don't get as good of a sear as you do with other methods. But that said, there's a few times that the oven does work great. The first is if you want to dry out your food a little bit. It sounds counterintuitive. Why would you go through the sous vide process and then dry out your food? But for some specific cuts, like brisket or pork shoulder, sometimes having a bark on the outside, having that dried off outer layer is key to achieving a more traditional texture. And using your oven allows you to do that pretty easily. There's a few different ways to accomplish this, but one is to chill your food a little bit. Preheat your oven to 200, 300 degrees, put a nice spice rub on your meat, and put it in the oven for 2 to 3 hours while it comes back to temperature and the outside dries out some. Just make sure that you monitor the internal temperature, that it's not raising above where you sous vide it at. It's okay to have the outer layers get a crust on it, but you don't want the inside to also be raising too much. Another time to use your oven that a lot of people overlook is if you want something on the outside of your food. There is a lot of traditional cooking methods that you add something on the outside. This could be a beef Wellington where you have puff pastry on the outside. Could be a chicken parm where there is a batter or a coating on it. It could be a glaze. It can be a herb crust or a Parmesan crust. There's a lot of things that people put on roasts, they put on tenderloins or pork loins that they use to finish them in traditional manners. And you can do all that with sous vide. You use sous vide to cook the food ahead of time, perfectly cooked, just how you want it. Then you can finish it off with whatever coating on the outside you want. So you can easily do a beef Wellington, where you sous vide the filet ahead of time, take it out, chill it down a little bit, then finish it like you normally would. Put on the mushrooms and the puff pastry, put it in the oven and bake it. But you're no longer worried about making sure the meat's cooked because it's already perfectly done. As soon as you get the browning on the coating, pull it off. You can use this if you like to apply glazes to your roasts. You can cook this food ahead of time, put the glaze on, finish it in the oven so it gets nice and sticky and coated with that wonderful flavor. So that's one time when using an oven is a great way to marry sous vide cooking with some great traditional methods to maximize your flavor. Another time that I turn to the oven for the searing process is when I have a piece of meat that's irregularly shaped. This could be a pork shoulder, this could be a chuck roast. It's something that's going to be really hard to pan fry, and maybe it's too cold outside to use my grill. Then I can turn to the broiler on my oven. If I crank the broiler up to high and I put the meat as close to it as I can, it'll fill in those nooks and crannies. It's a great way to get a more even sear without having to struggle with a pan. You still want to turn it a few times during the process to make sure that it does sear evenly, but the broiler can often work a lot better than a pan sear for some of these things with jagged edges that don't have a flat layer on them. Another time that I'll use the oven is when I have a lot of steaks to sear. If I'm trying to do multiple ones at a time, I can chill them down a little bit, put them under the broiler in the oven, and I can sear 10 or 20 steaks at the same time instead of having to fit them all into a cast iron pan, which I can only fit 2 or 3 steaks in at the same time. I always chill them a little bit ahead of time because the oven will raise their internal temperature some, so I give myself more leeway on how long of a sear I can do. And oftentimes I'll do a stronger sear on one side and a lighter sear on the other just to make sure I don't overcook it. So now you know a few of the times why you might want to use your oven to sear it. So I want to talk about the process some. It's very similar to the usual sous vide searing process. You take the food out of your sous vide bag and you dry it off really well. Especially using your oven, you're going to want to minimize the amount of time that it's in there. So use a paper towel, use some dishcloths, get all of that moisture off the outside so the sear happens much more quickly. I like to put a little bit of oil on the outside. I'll usually smear it directly onto the meat itself. And then I'll crank the broiler or the oven up as hot as it goes if I'm trying to get a sear. If I'm trying to dry off the outside, as I said, I'll usually use 200 to 300 degrees because that really just kind of dries the food without raising the temperature nearly as much. If it is something that's a little more finicky or is a smaller cut, I'll often chill the food or let it sit on the counter for 15-20 minutes so it gives me a longer time in the oven as well. It makes it a little bit easier to get a better sear without overcooking it. Once I'm ready to sear it, I'll put it on a sheet pan with edges or on a wire rack on a sheet pan with edges, and I'll put it in the oven as close to the broiler as it can get. Being close to the heat source will allow it to brown more quickly, and less of the heat will be dissipated through the air. It speeds it up just a little bit, and it gives you a little bit more even of a sear as well. During the browning process, I'll try to flip it 3 or 4 times just to keep that sear even. Then once it's golden brown on the outside, I'll pull it out, and it's usually going to be good to go, perfectly cooked and ready to eat. So now you know not only when you should use your oven to sear your food, but also the best way to do it. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston.